Every human being who has ever lived has faced the same moment. The person they loved most in the world stopped breathing, and the question that followed, where did they go, has no answer that the living can verify. And yet every civilization that has ever existed answered it anyway, not with a shrug, not with silence, but with extraordinary, elaborate, specific detail. The Egyptian dead traveled through 12 gates guarded by serpents, had their hearts weighed against a feather, and were either welcomed into eternal fields or devoured by a monster with a crocodile's head. The Maya dead descended through 9 levels of the underworld, called Xibalba, navigating rivers of blood and pus and scorpions, while the lords of death named 1 Death and 7 Death set traps designed to humiliate them. The Norse dead were sorted by how they died. Warriors killed in battle ascended to Valhalla, feasting and fighting until Ragnarok. Everyone else descended to the gray, cold halls of Helheim, ruled by a half-dead goddess named Hel. The Aztec dead spent 4 years navigating 9 underworld levels with only a hairless dog as guide, crossing a freezing river and enduring a wind of obsidian knives before reaching their final destination. These are not vague spiritual impressions. They are detailed maps of a place no one has ever returned from to confirm. And the fact that every civilization drew a different map while somehow agreeing on the same basic features is one of the most revealing things about what human beings actually believe, what they actually fear, and what kind of cosmic justice they desperately need the universe to contain. Begin in ancient Egypt, where the afterlife was not a vague spiritual realm but a bureaucratic process of extraordinary precision. The Egyptian underworld was called the Duat, and the journey through it was documented in meticulous detail in the Book of the Dead, a collection of spells, prayers, and instructions that wealthy Egyptians had copied onto papyrus and buried with their bodies, so they would know exactly what to say at each gate, to each guardian, in each hall. The dead traveled through 12 divisions of the Duat, each guarded by serpents and divine gatekeepers who demanded the correct password before they would allow passage. At the end of the journey came the Hall of Two Truths, where the decisive moment occurred, the weighing of the heart. The dead person's heart, believed to contain the complete record of every thought, word, and action of their entire life, was placed on one side of a scale. On the other side was placed the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth, justice, and cosmic order. The god Anubis, jackal-headed, operated the scale. The ibis-headed god Thoth recorded the result. If the heart was lighter than the feather, if the dead person had lived in accordance with Ma'at, with truth and justice and right relationship, they passed into the field of reeds, the Egyptian paradise, a perfect version of the Nile Valley, where they would farm and feast and live in the company of the gods forever. If the heart was heavier than the feather, weighted down by sin, by injustice, by the accumulated wrong of a life lived badly, it was thrown to Ammit, the devourer, a hybrid creature with the head of a crocodile, the forequarters of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus, who ate the heart, and the person ceased to exist entirely. No punishment, no hell. Simply annihilation, the second death, the permanent erasure of the self. What does this system reveal about Egyptian civilization? Egypt was a society built on an extraordinarily precise concept of justice, Ma'at, that was understood as the fundamental ordering principle of the cosmos, not merely a human legal convention. The pharaoh's primary function was to maintain Ma'at, to keep the Nile flooding on schedule, to keep the stars in their courses, to keep justice operating between human beings. The afterlife judgment is the extension of this same principle into eternity. The cosmic scales that weigh the pharaoh's administration of justice on earth are the same scales that will weigh every person's heart at death. No one escapes the accounting. Not the peasant who cheated his neighbor out of a grain measure. Not the official who took a bribe. Not the priest who performed his rituals without genuine devotion. The heart remembers everything, and the feather does not lie. In Sumer, the oldest written afterlife tradition we have, is also the darkest. The Sumerian underworld, called Kur, or Ur-Kala, is described in texts, including the descent of Inanna and the death of Ur-Nammu, as a place of absolute desolation. There is no judgment in the Egyptian sense, no weighing of merit, no paradise for the virtuous. Everyone goes to the same place. Kings and slaves, warriors and farmers, the just and the unjust, all of them descend to the great below and exist as pale shadows of themselves, eating dust and clay, wearing feathers as garments, sitting in absolute darkness. The Epic of Gilgamesh captures this Sumerian despair with devastating clarity. When Gilgamesh's companion Enkidu dies, he descends briefly to the underworld and returns with a report. The dead who had many sons fare slightly better than those who had none. The warrior killed in battle is honored by his father and weeping wife, but the man with no one to perform his funeral rites wanders without rest, eating the scraps that others throw away. There is no cosmic justice in the Sumerian underworld. There is only the continuation in diminished, dusty form of the social hierarchies that existed in life. Now ask why. The Sumerians were among the first people in the world to build cities, to develop writing, to create the administrative apparatus of complex civilization. They were also people who lived between unpredictable rivers, subject to floods that destroyed cities without warning, on a flat plain where enemies could arrive from any direction. The Sumerian universe was not benevolent. The gods did not love humanity. They had created humanity as a labor force and viewed human beings with a mixture of irritation and indifference. The Sumerian afterlife reflects this cosmic worldview. There is no guarantee that goodness will be rewarded, no promise that justice will ultimately prevail. Death is simply what happens. And what happens after death is not better than what happened before. It is merely a gray continuation of the same uncertain, unfair existence, stripped of even its pleasures. Travel to Greece, and the underworld becomes more architecturally elaborate and more philosophically complex. The Greek underworld Hades, named after the god who ruled it, was accessed by crossing the river Styx, the boundary between the living and the dead. The ferryman Charon transported the dead across the water, but only if they had been given a coin for payment placed in the mouth or on the eyes at burial. The unburied dead, those whose families had failed them, wandered the near shore for 100 years before Charon would take them across without payment. This single detail encodes an entire social philosophy. Death is not a solitary journey. It requires the living to perform their obligations to the dead. The failure of community, the abandonment of proper burial rites, condemns the dead to additional suffering. Your afterlife depends, in part, on what the people who loved you do after you are gone. Inside Hades, the dead were judged by three figures: Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus, legendary kings renowned for their justice in life. The virtuous went to the Elysian fields, a paradise of endless green and golden light. The ordinary went to the asphodel meadows, a neutral, gray existence, neither punishment nor reward. The wicked went to Tartarus, a place of eternal, specifically tailored punishment. Tantalus, who had killed his own son and served his flesh to the gods, stood for eternity in a pool of water beneath fruit trees, the water receding when he bent to drink, the fruit rising when he reached to eat, forever hungry and thirsty, forever almost satisfied. Sisyphus, who had cheated death twice through cunning, rolled a boulder up a hill for eternity, watching it roll back down just as he reached the top. Ixion was bound to a burning wheel that spun forever. The punishments in Tartarus are not random torture. They are specifically calibrated to the crime's symbolic, meaningful, eternal. The Greek afterlife is a theater of justice, and it is a justice that operates with the precision and symbolism of great drama, which is not surprising, given that the Greeks invented tragedy, the art form built around the principle that suffering has meaning, that the consequences of human choices reverberate far beyond the moment of the choice itself. The Norse afterlife is unlike any other in the ancient world because it is explicitly a sorting system based not on moral virtue, but on the manner of death. Die in battle, weapon in hand, and you may be chosen by the Valkyries' warrior women who rode the fields of slaughter, selecting the bravest of the fallen to ascend to Valhalla, the hall of the slain, where you would feast on roasted boar and drink from the udders of a divine goat, fighting and dying and being resurrected every day in preparation for the final battle of Ragnarok. Die of illness, of old age, of accident, of anything other than combat, and you descended to Helheim, the realm ruled by Hel, whose body was half living flesh and half corpse, half the color of life and half the blue-black of death. Helheim was not punishment, It was simply where the unremarkable dead went. There was no torture, no judgment, no accounting of deeds. There was only the gray continuation of existence, cold and dim, in the company of everyone who had died without glory. What does this system reveal about Norse civilization? Everything. The Norse were a maritime, warrior culture shaped by the awareness that survival required ferocity, that status was earned through combat, and that the only thing that outlasted death was reputation, the songs that the skalds would sing about you, the stories that would keep your name alive after your body was gone. The afterlife in Norse tradition is not a moral system. It is a warrior caste system projected into eternity. The good death is the violent death. The shameful death is the peaceful one. And Odin himself, the Allfather, the chief of the gods, does not promise his followers salvation. He promises them a seat at the table before the end of everything, one last magnificent feast before the apocalypse. The Norse afterlife is not a reward, it is an honor. In Mesoamerica, the Maya underworld Xibalba, described in the Popol Vuh with extraordinary narrative detail, is the most actively hostile afterlife in any tradition. Xibalba is not gray or peaceful, or even straightforwardly punishing. It is a place where the lords of death play games with the living, or rather, with the dead, and the games are designed to be lost. The hero twins Hunahpu and Xbalanque descend to Xibalba and must pass through houses of darkness, cold, fire, bats, and razor blades, each designed to kill them through a different kind of fear. The lords of death, one death, seven death, and a gallery of specialists named Blood Gatherer, Pus Master, Jaundice Master, Bone Scepter, Skull Scepter embody specific diseases and forms of suffering. The underworld is not an abstraction. It is a taxonomy of everything that can go wrong with a human body, and the only way through it is through intelligence, courage, and the refusal to be tricked. The hero twins ultimately defeat the lords of death, not by fighting them, but by outwitting them, by dying and being resurrected, by laughing at what the lords of death used to terrify, by turning the weapons of death against death itself. What the Maya underworld reveals about Maya civilization is its attitude toward suffering. It is not to be accepted passively, not to be endured with resignation. It is to be engaged actively, outwitted, subverted. The dead who enter Xibalba and simply wait for justice will not find it. The dead who play the game better than the lords of death, who stay awake when they should sleep, who refuse to sit on the stone seats designed to humiliate them, who speak when they should be silent and are silent when they should speak, those are the ones who get through. In China, the Buddhist-influenced underworld of Diyu evolved into one of the most elaborate bureaucratic afterlife systems ever conceived. Diyu has 18 levels, or in some accounts, 10 courts, each presided over by a different king of hell, where the dead are processed, judged, and assigned punishments calibrated precisely to the nature and severity of their sins. A person who had been dishonest in business might spend time in a level where they were forced to swallow hot iron. A person who had been cruel to animals faced specific punishments related to their specific cruelties. The entire system operated on the principle of karma, the precise accounting of cause and effect across lifetimes, and it was administered by a divine bureaucracy that mirrored the imperial bureaucracy of China itself, with its courts, its officials, its record-keeping, its appeals processes. After the appropriate punishments had been served, the dead were brought before the wheel of reincarnation, given a potion of forgetfulness by the old lady Meng, and reborn into a new life, at a level appropriate to their accumulated karma. What is philosophically distinctive about Diyu is its insistence on rehabilitation rather than permanent damnation. Hell in the Chinese tradition is not eternal. It is a purification process, a cosmic correctional facility from which the soul eventually emerges cleansed and ready for another attempt at getting life right. This reflects a fundamental difference in how Chinese Buddhism approached moral accounting, not as a final judgment at the end of a single life, but as an ongoing process across countless lifetimes, always moving slowly, painfully, sometimes at great cost in the direction of liberation. Now step back and look at what all of these traditions are doing. Egyptian Ma'at, Sumerian dust, Greek Tartarus, Norse Valhalla, Maya Xibalba, Chinese Diyu, they are each solving the same problem from a different direction. The problem is this: human beings are moral creatures living in an amoral universe. Good people suffer, evil people prosper. The honest farmer loses his crop to a flood, while the corrupt official builds a palace. The woman who spent her life in kindness dies in pain, while the tyrant dies in comfort. Justice, as experienced in the world of the living, is unreliable at best and absent at worst. The afterlife is the solution every civilization independently invented for this unbearable fact. If justice cannot be guaranteed in this world, it must be guaranteed in the next. The scales that fail to balance in life will balance perfectly in death. Amit waits for the hearts that the courts of the living could not reach. Tartarus holds the tyrants that no army could touch. Diyu processes the unpunished sins that karma has temporarily deferred, and Xibalba tests every soul equally noble and commoner, brave and cowardly, with the same traps, the same lords of death, the same terrifying houses in the dark. But there is a second function that the afterlife serves, which is less about justice and more about meaning. The Sumerian underworld offers no justice and no paradise, and its very bleakness is a form of honesty. It says, "The universe does not guarantee that goodness will be rewarded." But the Sumerian tradition also says something else, embedded in the Epic of Gilgamesh itself. Since the underworld is inevitable and offers nothing, the only rational response is to live fully now. Eat bread, drink beer, dance, love the person next to you, look at the child who holds your hand. This is what you have. Time, every afterlife tradition, even the most terrifying, is ultimately a technology for living a way of organizing the terror of death so that it does not paralyze the living, a way of insisting that what happens in a human life matters, that the choices made in the brief span between birth and death echo somewhere, in some register, into a silence that is not simply nothing. In the Hindu tradition, the afterlife court of Yama, the Lord of the Dead, the first mortal who ever died, and therefore the first to know the way, operates on a principle of cosmic accounting so precise that it makes the Egyptian weighing of the heart look approximate. Yama's scribe Chitragupta keeps a complete record of every action, every thought, and every intention of every living being across every lifetime. When the dead arrive before Yama's court, Chitragupta reads the record aloud, and Yama passes judgment. A period in Svarga, the heavenly realms, if the accumulated karma is positive. A period in Naraka, the various hells, each calibrated to specific sins, if it is negative, and then reincarnation into a new body at a level determined by the overall balance. The Hindu tradition is the most explicit of all in its insistence that no single lifetime is the whole story. The soul, the Atman, moves through countless lives, accumulating and discharging karma, slowly working its way toward moksha, liberation from the cycle of rebirth entirely. Yama's court is not the end. It is a way station. And this single idea that one life is not enough to settle all accounts, that justice operates across a time span so vast it makes a single human lifetime look like a single heartbeat, may be the most radical answer any civilization has ever given to the problem of injustice in the world. The wicked are not permanently damned. The virtuous are not permanently rewarded. Everyone is in process. Everyone is, across the enormous arc of cosmic time, moving toward the same destination. The court of Yama is not a final judgment. It is a progress report. What all of these afterlife traditions share beneath the specific geography of each underworld, beneath the particular names of each judge and each punishment and each paradise, is the conviction that a human life is not a random event in a random universe, that what you do matters, that how you treat the people around you will be accounted for, somewhere, by something, in a register that does not lie and does not forget. Whether that accounting happens on a set of golden scales beside a feather, or in a divine court where a scribe has recorded every thought you ever had, or in the automatic operation of karma across 1,000 lifetimes, or in the memory of the people who loved you and buried you and paid the ferryman, the conviction is the same. You are not nothing. Your life is not nothing. The choices you made in the brief, terrifying, beautiful span between your first breath and your last are not nothing. They go somewhere. They mean something. They are weighed. This is what every afterlife tradition, from the most punishing to the most compassionate, from the darkest to the most luminous, is ultimately insisting. Not that death is not real. Not that the body does not return to dust, that the neurons do not stop firing, that the voice does not go silent, but that the silence is not the end of the sentence. That somewhere, in the dark, on the other side of the river that no living person has crossed and returned to describe, the sentence continues, and how it ends depends, at least in part, on how you lived.